Marvelous. Good morning, everybody. This is very exciting. Thanks all for coming to hear me ramble about, I don't know, designing watches or something. I'd like also to thank Dubai Watch Week for asking me to come and speak. So I'm gonna sort of do this, and I sort of saw this in sort of three sections, you know. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some background as regards sort of what motivates me and influences me in terms of how I work with watches. Then I'm going to give you a wee bit of insight into how the sort of process of conceiving mechanisms and watches goes. We'll not go too deep into that because I don't want to bore you all to death, and you don't want a maths lesson at 12 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon. So we'll just look a wee bit of sort of insight into how the design and construction works, and then lastly I'll just talk a bit about sort of psychologically, I suppose, where I find myself in this whole bizarre process. And then we'll have a few questions at the end, and then that'll be that. So I added this, when I was designing the talk, I added this wee subtitle, An Obsession with Detail, because I realized as I was going along and thinking about what I was going to say that this idea of detail is totally fundamental to everything, and you'll see that I come back to this notion of detail again and again. It's pivotal to everything that I do in working with watches. So I'll start a bit with my sort of motivation and influences and so on. Right from whenever I was a small child, I've always been obsessed with mechanical things. That could be cars, steam engines, gearboxes. Really, really love gearboxes and all that kind of stuff, you know. But in two senses, from a deeply technical point of view, but also an aesthetic point of view. However, it was from about the age of maybe 6 or 7 that watches and clocks were what particularly captivated me. I always say like it sounds ridiculous, but I never chose watchmaking. It's like it chose me. It's like a big hand reached out of the sky and sort of grabbed me, you know. I don't know where it came from, but it's like something I had no choice in at all. But there's one thing which has had and continues to have a really big effect on my work with watches, and that is detail. Because I've got an overriding obsession with technical detail, but there's two things in particular I'm always looking for something to really please me. Firstly, of course, the thing has to be done in an aesthetic way, so you can have a gear or a lever or a spring or whatever, but if you're going to make it in a beautiful way. What's cool about it is that that lever, to fulfill its function technically, it can be 100 different ways, it can look 100 different ways, or an infinite number of ways. The aesthetic element doesn't change technically how it functions at all. It doesn't make it work any better or worse. It has no influence. But you spend all this time to make the thing beautiful, and I think that's just so exciting and wonderful and kind of mental. But you've also got this depth of aesthetic attention, and I think that's what's so interesting about watches in particular, and it applies to almost nothing else. Think about cars, for example. The bits which are nice on cars, even really high-level cars, you see the beautiful bodywork and the interior, all the bits that you work with as an individual, you know, the bits that you interact with. But if you pull up the carpets, or look in the back where the spare wheel goes, or look where the suspension mountings are, it's just lots of cheap plastic and spot welds. You know, there's no depth of beauty, and the cool thing about watches is that they've got this wonderful contrariness, sort of pointlessness, and that you've got all this attention to detail to make the components beautiful and finely finished. And the people who wear the watches never get to see probably 70% of those parts. You can only see what's visible through the glass. All the components which are deep in the watch, only the watchmaker who disassembles and reassembles when you get the watch serviced, only that person gets to see all that beauty. So I love this kind of contrary idea that you've got all this fantastic detail that nobody gets to see. It's brilliant, you know. I think that's so exciting. So I see interest all around me in all sorts of mechanical objects, not just watches. I love trains. I find trains so like romantic and beautiful, you know. And I remember as a kid going to like steam fairs and standing watching like the eccentrics rotating, which operate the valves on the steam engines. You know, I just thought this was the most mesmerizing, wonderful, beautiful thing. How the coreless valves flick to change the timing for the inlet. You know, it's just magic. This sort of thing is the common thread. The common thread through all this is my sort of ultra obsession with detail and everything. I wanted to like be miniaturized so I could climb right inside the gearbox to watch all the stuff happening, or see the interior of the engine with everything going up and down. You know, I just find this so exciting. So this love and obsession with detail has continued to inform me my whole life, and without it, I just wouldn't be involved with watches in the way that I am. So what's important is a kind of combination of mechanics and detail. I've got an example to sort of illustrate this. I think this is really cool. So I'm not going to tell you what it is. I'm just going to show it to you, and I'll explain a wee bit, and then I'll tell you afterwards. If somebody knows what it is, by the way, please don't shout out, okay? So it's this is one of my favorite places on earth where I've been about 10 or 15 times. So it's this really austere building, and you know, it doesn't look very exciting from the outside, but we're going to look inside now, okay? Wow. So look, when you talk about detail, look at the detail. Now the problem is this place is so big that you can't, with a single photograph, you can't get it all in. So all you're getting is sort of a piecemeal impression. But like, so you've got detail everywhere in all this metalwork. You've obviously got these big machines, but there's a great deal of detail everywhere in this. Now look at some more. So look at this. You've got this amazing octagon in the center of the building, this big light well, you know, and all the light comes in and goes in all directions. And there's detail absolutely everywhere. The place is dripping with detail. You don't know where to look. It's mind-blowing. Look at all the metalwork and all these like leaves and flowers and the monogram of the company who created the building in the first place. It's just magic. I spent days and days in this place just looking around. Look at the pillars and like even the brickwork in the background, the beautiful bricks and the colors in the brickwork, you know. There's detail absolutely everywhere. More, you know, details on the pillars and the arches behind. It's completely marvelous. This is the bottom end of the big machine, you know, and look at the handrails and the barley twist pillars, you know, and, you know, it's just a handrail. But look, I mean, all the wee brackets that hold the brass handrail together and stuff, you know, which are finished in dovetails. It's magic. This is the top bit, so this is the big beam at the top. And even look at the floor, all the detail in the floor. I just think this is the coolest thing ever, right? And so, does anybody know what it is? No. This is a sewage pumping station. This is Crossness Engines in London. It was opened in 1865, and it still exists. Obviously, it's now a museum, but it's still part of like the water system, the water service in London. So it was never a public building. You could never just go there, and even today, you can only get in on the weekends that they run the engines. So these are 4 massive steam engines. That's what you can see. And the cool thing is, right, that the only people who ever got to see all this stuff were the people who ran and maintained the engines to pump sewage. I just think this is it. This for me, this sums it up. You know, it's everything I'm interested in detail. Cool detail done just for the sake of doing something really well, regardless of the fact that nobody gets to see it. For me, that's my modus operandus right there. You know. Okay, so that's a wee bit about my sort of what informs me and the background and so on. I'll talk now a wee bit about the actual process of watch development and how that goes. So in a nutshell, I suppose the best way to explain what I do working on a project is that you start in a sort of macro view and you get closer and closer and closer with more and more detail all the time. So at the beginning, I would conceive some sort of ideas and some sort of, you know, notions about a watch, and that's just ideas in the back of my head. I don't really know how it works, or even if it's possible to realize. So I would go to Geneva, we would discuss with the guys at MBNF, you know, we'd all sit around, Max and Serge and everybody, you know, and maybe we would choose an idea to go with, and that looks good. And then, so for example, in the case of the Sequential chronograph, which is the watch which won the GPHG Aiguille d'Or last year, the very first time I formally proposed that idea to them in Geneva was away back in 2018, Max, maybe, something like that. So I kept the sketch from that meeting. So this is the very first thing that Max ever saw of that watch. This is our sketch from that day. And you see we've been drawing all over it and stuff, you know. So it's interesting, actually, because the watch as it is now, as it actually exists, looks more or less like this. You can see you've got the 2-minute counters at the top, and then you've got the seconds counters and so on. It looks more or less like this, except that if you look at the top, you can see the scale 5:1 is upside down. So actually, when I originally conceived the watch, I had imagined the whole watch the other way up from what you know it today. So in fact, what we did at that meeting was we decided to do it this way round. But we were playing with all sorts of other things as well. Like, for example, I thought we could do like a single-footed bridge instead of the double-footed bridge that we have now. And we thought maybe we could put the power reserve mechanism down here, So we're sort of playing with all these ideas. And that was sort of the origin of the thing, So that's how it begins. So we'll establish that, set out some basic rules, and then this will always happen at least a year before I start working on it, because we don't reach the very end of a project and then the next day go, okay, what are we going to do next? We'd always have this discussion maybe a year before the end of the present project so that we know what's going to happen in the future. So I've got like a year then to finish. Once we've done this, decided that's what we're going to do, there's maybe a year of sort of me then thinking. So I'll do a great deal of thinking just in my head when I'm lying in bed or when I'm drying the dishes or whatever's going on. I'm always crunching this around because I can sort of see it all in 3D. So I'll be working out all the different systems of the watch before I put pen to paper, so to speak. This is very important sort of pre-study bit. So when we finally decide to begin work on the project, I've already been working on in my head for many months. The day the thing actually begins, the design work begins, then I sit down with CAD and I start to work on all that stuff, But before modeling any components at all, the very first thing I would do is do loads of geometric analysis of the different parts of the mechanism. Everything in watchmaking, from a technical point of view, is based on geometry. So I have to spend literally months drawing geometry and working out how all the different bits are going to work. So watchmaking is an interesting marriage between the technical bit defined by the geometry, that's how it works, and then the aesthetic bits, which have got nothing to do with that. They're purely based on a gut reaction. So I'm designing components which are beautiful, but also which function. So I've got a couple of examples of this process without getting into too much detail, as I say, and boring everybody to death. So this is the sequential chronograph. We're going to look at just the section which, whenever you press the start-stop button at 10 o'clock, we're going to look a wee bit at how that works. So if you keep your eyes up towards hold on. First of all, I'll remove the dials and the balance and so on. So we'll strip some stuff away. Okay, now the slides are going to move quite quickly here, so try and stay with me. The bit we're interested in, I'm going to highlight in green on the top right. Okay, so it's these components. We're going to move more closely to those. That's the same group of components highlighted. And now I'm going to take away all the bits that we're not interested in just to make things clearer. So you're left with this. So I'm going to make this move, and I've done a wee animation, so you'll see actually how this bit functions. So here we go. So this is what's happening here is this is you. The green cylinder is you. That's your finger, and this is you literally pressing the start-stop button. So you can see whenever you do that, you move this like an operating lever here, side to side. Then there's this pivoted lever, which pivots around this point here. Then you've got a click and the column wheel. And the column wheel is indexed by a jumper, which is just here. So this is the clicking sound you can hear when you press the start-stop button is this mechanism, rolling around. So this is just one system on a watch filled with many, many, many systems like this. Okay, so we'll look a wee bit more on how this goes. So I'm going to remove all the components, and we'll look just at the main plate, which is the bit right underneath. Okay, so this is the main plate. Don't need that. And then I'm going to add the sketches. Now, this is all backwards to how I would do it, because I would begin with the sketch and then design the components from that. But if we start with the sketches today, it won't mean anything because it'll have no context for you. So that's why I start with the parts and we move down into the geometry. So here's the geometry which defines what we've just seen. It's this. So this is actually what I draw. So you can see, like up here at the top, you've got 1.2 millimeters. That's the distance of travel of the pusher. Then you can see that the long operating lever is down here. This lever is pivoting about this point, and then this is the click working with the triangular teeth of the column wheel to rotate. So you have all these angles and stuff, and you can see that this lever over here, he's moving by 22.93959 degrees, etc., etc. So it's lots of geometry and mathematics really in this, To look a bit more closely then, the jumper is here. So that's the system with the jumper. The jumper's there, and he's indexing the column wheel. And we'll look more closely then at this area. So there now you've got that's the actual jumper itself. And you see I've drawn the jumper in 3 positions. And it's interesting because this middle position shows the jumper. The jumper's got like a beak, and it sits between the 2 teeth of the column wheel when the column wheel's still. So whenever you rotate the column wheel, the jumper is pushed out of the way, so it's deflected up to this point. So I'm measuring the deflection, I'm measuring the force that I'm getting and stuff, you see. And then whenever you remove the column wheel completely, the jumper is then at its rest position, because you have to pre-arm the jumper to always have tension. So the rest position is right down here. So in fact, I draw the jumper in 3 different states to analyze how it's going to work functionally, and that it's not going to bend and nothing's going to go wrong, and it's not going to bang into any other components. So there's quite a lot of work in that, you know. Another example would be, this is the bridge side of the movement. At the bottom right, you've got the power reserve mechanism. So we're going to look a little bit more closely at the power reserve mechanism. There you go. That's exactly the same part, but we look closer now. And now I'm going to remove all the components and just leave the main plate behind. So here's the main plate, okay? And now, the geometry which defines how all that works is this. So you see, I'm just drawing lines and circles and doing calculations for weeks before anything else happens, really. So you can see that the total deflection of the power reserve hand is 151.35135 degrees. You have all these angles and everything added in there. There's the wheels which operate the gear train. There's the sector to drive the hand, all that kind of stuff. So there's quite a lot of geometry in there underneath all of the actual components. The last example is just this spring. You see the spring highlighted in green. So a very simple example, just a single component. And if I go closer, more close to the spring, so it's this guy here. And the spring is working with this wee lever up at the top. So that's the only part of the spring which actually functions as such as the very tip where it works with this lever. Everything else is just, it's to look nice and to, you know, be aesthetic, and where the steady pins are and where the screw is, all this area is just to support the rest and to look nice. So if we go inside the spring, there's the spring isolated, and the geometry which underpins the spring is this. So again, I'm looking at the deflection. I'm making sure it doesn't bang into anything else. I'm making sure there's room for the feet and the screw and so on, you know. So I will design all of the functional bits first. And it's interesting, so the geometry defines the function, but then the aesthetics is all like from here, you know. There's no rules to how that works. The part has to follow what's defined by the geometry, but the aesthetics are all down to, I suppose, me and how I perceive the part should look, and that it should work it should look nice not just by itself, but in harmony with everything around it. So it's a completely holistic design. Here's the 2 dimensions of the spring, designed according to the geometry, and now I'm going to turn that into, this is the design process. 3 dimensions now, I extrude the thing up, so now it becomes a spring. I need to add somewhere where the screw head can go, so that's where the screw sits. And then finally, to make it look nice and to finish it off properly, I add all the bevels. Now it looks like a spring, you see? So that's that's sort of a few steps in the sort of process of how all that goes. So the design of the components in the whole watch really is a sort of 2D exercise, but the creation of the aesthetic forms is an entirely personal interpretation of how I think they should all look. So when everything is finalized and the design's done, I hand the whole dossier over to MBNF, and then it's interesting because suddenly other people are involved. I've been working almost by myself for maybe 2.5 years on the design, and then that's all done, and then the whole team all move into action, and it's a weird feeling because the project seems to grow legs and become alive and take on a life of its own. I always think of the quote from Gandalf in The Lord of the Rings when he says, "The board is set and the pieces are moving." And that's a bit how it feels at that point. So the problem is that, of course, the very best computer modeling cannot know everything, and there's lots of unknown risks and danger areas in watch design. The nature of the work that I'm doing is that these are fundamentally new mechanisms and new designs, and they haven't been tried before very often, so there's a lot of risk involved. This means that the rewards are great, of course, but the risks are even greater sometimes. There's an ever-present danger, and that's the sort of hidden flaw that I always talk about, and that's my biggest worry. That's what keeps me awake and, you know, creates so much anxiety in my life. I'm always trying to find that there might be some flaw in the design that I've created, which is going to scupper everything, and the whole house of cards is going to topple. And in different ways, in both the perpetual calendar and the sequential chronograph, that's exactly what happened. So that's why, as I'll explain a wee bit more later, but so prototyping is really essential, and the prototyping is the next stage in this whole business, you know. So the only way to find out if it works is to build it and try. So I always build the very first prototype myself this is my little workshop in Belfast. So this is where I was 4 days ago. This is me standing on my desk taking photographs. So I've got the thing about the workshop is, and it's an important point to note, is that the idea of being independent. So I am independent in the sense that I've got all the equipment here. There's my milling machine, gear cutting machine, jig borer, all sorts of. It's not very tidy. I'm sorry, I didn't tidy up. I should have organized it better. Screw cutting lathe, you know, all sorts of bits and pieces. I've got everything I need here to make virtually any watch component. So what that means is that, say I need a spring, there's a problem with the spring, it needs to be 0.05 of a millimeter thicker or something. If I have to get that from Switzerland, it'll maybe take 12 weeks. But if I redesign it and make it myself, I can have it in a day. So in that way, I'm very reactive for the prototyping, because as you'll see, often I have to make components many, many times before I get it right. So the idea of having all the equipment here that I can do this means that I'm very reactive and the prototyping can move forward very fast. This is my CNC machine, this big thing that looks like a great big oven. That's my CNC milling machine here on the right, and I've got an old-fashioned profile projector and stuff. So I've got pretty much everything I need here to go forward with the prototyping, you know, which is very important. So if everything goes to plan, the prototyping is a really exciting part of the process, because I've got all these ideas in my head, and the designs on paper and on the screen, they actually start to turn into real live components. And I've seen all these things on the screen that I've designed, and then suddenly I've got these parts which are those bits, but they're real or in metal. You know, it's really thrilling. And when you put it all together, the idea is, if all goes well, it lives. And this is the most thrilling, most romantic, most exciting feeling. I memean, I remember that, the mechanism I was just showing you with the column wheel and so on, I remember assembling that. And it's only that, just that on the main plate, and suddenly you press and it moves and the column wheel rotates, and it's literally like magic. I mean, I had the hair standing up in the back of my neck, you know, it's really, really wonderful. So with the legacy machines, in the case of these watches that I've done, you've got almost 600 components. So it's a wonderful metal jigsaw, every piece of which I've conceived and designed myself, and it all starts to take shape in front of my eyes. So it's very, very, very exciting. I'm going to give you a couple examples of why the prototyping is so important. So this is the famous long balance staff from the so-called split escapement from the legacy machine Perpetual. So on the left-hand side, the balance staff is the sort of axle on which the balance is spinning, you know, as oscillating. The left-hand side shows you what a balance would typically look like from a watch of this size, a balance of this size. The length of the shaft is usually like, you know, 3.5, 3.8 millimeters. The one I had to use for the Perpetual is 11.8, so it's massive. This is useful because the escapement, there was no room to put the escapement on the dial side because of all the mechanism I designed for the Perpetual, so it had to go somewhere else. And I thought, okay, normally you can't really see the escapement, it's kind of hidden underneath the balance, so this is a perfect opportunity to put the escapement on the bridge side, then everybody can see it. That's going to look cool. But it involves this big long balance staff. So I presented the idea to MBNF, and they were a bit iffy. They weren't convinced it was going to work, which is totally fair enough, by the way. I think they were right to be skeptical. So the only way to find out was to build a prototype, so that's what I did. So MBNF lent me the prototype movement of LM1, and so the black plate is the surface of LM1. So I took LM1, I hand-made the balance staff in my workshop, the big long shaft. I made these extension pillars, which are these things at the back, for the LM1 balance bridge, and I put it all together in my workshop. So here you can see the extension pillars at the back and the big long balance staff that I made. So the thing looks daft, but here it is actually on the LM1 prototype in my workshop in 2014 or whatever it was. And so in this way I can find out that yes, it worked, there was no problem at all, it worked entirely well, and MBNF were happy and we could move on. So that's a reasonably straightforward and a sort of simple and happy outcome for prototyping, you know, but it's not always like that. This is the I always call this the kind of graveyard box this is the Perpetual calendar. This is everything that went wrong with the Perpetual calendar. This is all the parts I had to bin or didn't work or had to remake several times. This is all the stuff that didn't work. So this box represents months and months of work, although, you know, it's not much to look at, I appreciate, but everything here was, you know, a sort of a mini nightmare, really, I suppose. So a couple of examples. Here are some levers, you know, some bits and pieces. So if you look, for example, if you look at this lever in the middle, you see it's got a little sort of beak here. So the beak is quite small in this case. Here it's getting larger, and here it's getting larger. So that lever had to evolve in order to work properly. Similarly down here, this is the corrector lever, the master corrector, the button you press at 10 o'clock in the Perpetual calendar. You see down here, it's simple. There's nothing there. And then here the lever becomes more complicated, and here it changes again. So these parts have all evolved in order to get the functionality that I needed, because the original design it didn't work. And I could only find that out when I tried it in the metal. The prototyping, the design wasn't able to tell me that. Here you can see how these sort of levers are made. This is a steel lever, so you can see literally what I've done is I get a rectangle cut out with my little saw, a rectangle of steel, adjust the thickness, and then I make this all in the milling machine, do all the holes in the milling machine, and then any threads that are required, I cut the threads by hand. So this is the sort of process of actually making the levers and so on, and it's all done sort of by hand in my workshop. But I can do this very quickly and rapidly. Here are some springs. Now, it's the same spring, and bear in mind as well that the existing is the actual prototype of the perpetual calendar is in MB&F safe in Geneva. So for everything you see here, there is an extra one, which is the one that actually worked, which is in the prototype and still in the prototype to this day. So this spring, you can see, this didn't work properly at all, and I kept having to remake and redesign and remake and redesign. So I made 6 versions of this spring before it worked. And if you look closely, you can see here the spring is very thin. And if you look at moving towards the right, it's getting gradually thicker and thicker and thicker. So I had to constantly adjust this spring to create more force. Also, the shape is different. The one on the left is very straight, and it becomes more curvy as you move towards the right. So, if you imagine each of these is at least a day's work, and then you make it, you try it, and within 5 minutes, it's no good, into the bin, start again. So there's a great deal of kind of, months pass quickly in this process, This is the famous lever from the perpetual calendar, which controls the programming of the mechanical processor. And so this is the bit that nearly, destroyed the whole project. I'm not going to go into lots of detail in this, but just to explain very briefly, the one on the left is the original version of this lever, and this lever controls the programming of the processor on the 25th of the month. I had always known, this is the funny thing, I'd always known in the prototype, in the design, that this was going to be problematic, let's say, and so I had put in all sorts of safeguards in the design to try to make sure that it would work. I spoke to a very learned friend and asked his opinion, and he thought this was fine, but all through the design, I'd been looking for this foolproof solution to this, a surefire solution, not just a like a safety measure, but an absolute solution. And he told me that couldn't exist because of the contra-rotating nature of the components that I was dealing with. But he thought the safeguards I put in place should be more than adequate. So the original version is the one on the left. That seemed to be okay. I built it, and it was catastrophically bad. It didn't work at all. And I tried everything. I adjusted all the springs. Nothing worked at all. I remember phoning MB&F. I phoned Serge on like a Friday morning, and I was literally in tears. And I said, look, this does not work. The whole project doesn't work. I can't get it to work, and there is no workaround. And I mean, it was horrendous. I'm still thinking about it now. It's upsetting, to be honest. And Serge said, okay, calm down, go on over the weekend and try to think about something else, and we'll let a few days pass and see if somebody has an idea. So we did that. And bear in mind, I'd been thinking about this for over a year, and I couldn't find the magic solution. And I was sitting in the workshop on Monday morning feeling very depressed and sorry for myself, and the magic solution just dropped out of the sky into my head. And within 3 hours, I had redesigned the lever you see on the right. So it's the same lever, but it's gained this extra shepherd's crook sort of arm at the top. And that was the solution I'd been searching for like a year and a half. And I built it, and it worked straight away. First time, perfect, and that solved all the problems, So the outcome was good, but I mean, it's just such a high anxiety level to be functioning at, and that's what I find difficult. Here's the scrap box for the graveyard box for the sequential chronograph, and again, months and months of work is represented by these bits and pieces that you see here, because again, this didn't work. This didn't work. So you've got the same sort of thing here. There's lots of levers and springs. The jumper spring you saw earlier, that's the jumper at the bottom, and you can see here the jumper is thinner, and it's getting thicker as we move towards the right-hand side. This is the lever for the return to zero function. You see here it's very thin, here it gets thicker, here it gets thicker. So these parts have been evolved and evolved to try to get the thing to work in the way that I wanted it to work. These are the big wheels, which you can see visually on the bridge side of the watch. And as I say, this didn't work at all whenever I built it. And the difference is that, this is what I find so odd about this whole business, is that with the perpetual calendar, I knew there was a problem area, and I was aware that there was a risk here it worked even worse than I thought it would when I actually built it, but I knew there was a problem. With the sequential chronograph, I really, genuinely, I had not spotted this flaw at all, and that's what's so disconcerting. That's what's terrible. And to be honest, even now, my self-confidence took such a kick at that time that I still haven't really got over it, truthfully, because it didn't work at all. The chronographs kept desynchronizing from the bass movement, and it's because of the vertical clutch. I designed this dual vertical clutch, and the clutch operates these big wheels which drive the minute counters. And because of the desynchronization thing, the two chronographs kept going out of time with the basic movement. So with the perpetual calendar, it was a kind of a eureka moment. I realized what I had to do to redesign that lever and so on. With this sequential chronograph, it was more sort of a gradual process of incremental improvements all over the place, which gradually got the thing to work and sorted the problem out. But again, it was very scary. So to give you an example, one of the problems was the inertia of these great big wheels, which look pretty, but are a nightmare from a point of view of the sort of mathematics of the thing, because they've got huge inertia. So the original version is the one at the bottom. And what you can see is that it's in a kind of orangey material, which is called copper beryllium, which is quite heavy. So we had to change the material. The finished one is in titanium, which is way lighter. And you can see also, if you look at the thickness of the arms, the one at the top is much thicker. And the one at the top is much thinner. And also the thickness of the rim on the top is much thinner than the one at the bottom. You can't really see it, but also the thickness of the wheel itself is much less. The one at the top is only 0.15 millimeters thick, whereas the one at the bottom is 0.3. So with all these changes, and the material and everything thinner, the one at the top has actually got 5 times less inertia than the one at the bottom. And okay, it doesn't look like a lot. And looking at the watch, you probably wouldn't even think about it, but this actually makes the watch possible. Whereas without all this, it just wouldn't and couldn't work. This is the clutch. And again, this was a very gradual process of all sorts of incremental improvements to increase the frictional surface and increase the force which I had, but without making the spring stronger, because if the spring is stronger, then the mechanism wouldn't be able to engage and disengage the clutch. So there was a great deal of work involved in that. So the prototyping for the sequential took like 9 months. It was an absolute slog. And for all that time, I'm so consumed with these problems that it really boils over into my normal life, which is it's exhausting sometimes. Okay, so that's, I suppose, a wee bit about the prototyping. I'll just finish off by showing this is the actual, just to give you an idea what it looks like. This is the prototype movement for the sequential. We don't need that little thing there. This is what it looks like. You can see, so this is in my workshop. So this is the very first sequential movement which ever functioned. And you can see everything's just brass and steel. There's no finishing, there's no color. Even the hands are just made in brass just to have something to try. So it's mechanically identical to the one that you can buy, but it has none of the finishing because it's purely a mechanical prototype to give proof of concept. Here's the back of the watch. And you can see that again, the bridges are just brass. There's no Cote de Genève, there's no nice plating, there's no colors, there's nothing. It's just brass and steel. So that's kind of the movement in its totally raw form. So, so that's sort of a bit about the prototyping and the process of designing the watches. The last thing I'm going to talk about a little bit is the sort of the psychology. I mentioned a wee bit about the psychology of all this, which I don't know, it's sort of important. I think it's important. Winning the Aiguille d'Or at the GPHG was, without a doubt, the high point of my professional life, winning it with this. I wasn't able to go to the ceremony. MBNF invited me, but I just couldn't do it. I couldn't be present because, I had conceived this thing. I had lived with it. It's like my child. I know all about its worries and its frustrations, and I know all about its hopes and fears for the future. It tells me everything, and I've lived with it and, loved it and adored it and sort of given life to it. And then whenever it goes to a competition like that, and, what if people don't like it? And I couldn't bear that. So I couldn't bear to be present, because I couldn't take the risk of being there if it didn't do well, because I just couldn't cope with that. If that had happened, I would have wanted the floor to open up and swallow me and teleport me magically back to my little workshop in Belfast where nobody could see me. But of course, when it won, I did wish I had gone, but you know, hindsight's a great thing. So watchmaking's, I think it's quite bad for my mental health, because for someone with a tendency to push their obsessive attention to detail, and it is all about detail as far as possible, watchmaking is the perfect vehicle to allow overindulgence of this tendency to get completely out of control. And that's why I struggle a lot with a sort of tenuous grip on my sanity and keeping things in perspective and work-life balance. I don't have a work-life balance, I've got a work-life imbalance. You know, so, and this is especially the case when things go badly, when those problems that I showed you a bit about in the prototyping, when those are on the go, it consumes me completely. And I can't, nothing can move forward until I've sorted those things out. I can't stop thinking about them. I dream about them. It doesn't matter what I'm doing, they're there right in front of me all the time, which it's not good for me, it's not good for my family. I mean, I don't know what to do about it. I don't create watches for the sake of business at all. It's rather a sort of psychological requirement, I suppose. I would be doing this in private, even if there was no sort of commercial angle to it at all. It's just a sort of a need. I'm driven in a way by forces that I can neither understand or control, and it's getting worse, maybe. For this reason, I always feel I'm operating a really high level of emotion, which is exhausting. I remember the launch of this watch, the Sequential, which was, we did this thing. I was in Geneva with the MBNF guys, and Max was here in Dubai. We did this kind of two-way podcast link thing, you know. And so that was the day the watch was actually launched, and I was so nervous. And I remember afterwards, you know, because as I said before, this is like my child, and I had, you know, I'd conceived every one of its components, every screw, every lever, every bit. I had decided where they go, what they look like, every bit. You know, I've poured my heart and soul into it. And then you have to give it away to the world. And maybe people are going to like it, or maybe they're going to hate it. They're going to write bad things about it, you know. And it's so emotional. So I remember after that launch was done, and I was like stumbling around the old town of Geneva in the rain, looking in shop windows. I didn't even know what to do with myself, you know. I just felt so, it was like a bereavement, really. That's what it felt. And I was truly depressed for about 6 months after that, you know, because so much had gone into that, and then suddenly it's launched. And then, you know, it's not mine anymore. That's a very odd feeling. It's all because I care about it so very much. That watchmaking forces me to live with a sort of constantly high level of stress. It's like a feeling of living on the edge. I was discussing exactly this yesterday with Max. And the torment of endlessly searching for that hidden flaw. Is there something wrong? Is there something I haven't spotted? Is the whole house of cards going to tumble in the next 5 minutes when I suddenly spot the glaring error that I've made? Throughout any project, this feeling never goes away until the prototype works, which can mean years and years of anxiety, which is you know, hard on the nerves. In conclusion, after all this rambling, I would sort of pose the question, what is mechanical watchmaking really for? What purpose does it serve? Why do people like yourselves want to own high-level mechanical watches? It's certainly not to tell the time. And I think actually that's the interesting thing about it, is because what we've done today is we've eliminated the technical requirement for mechanical watchmaking. Years ago, of course, I'm sure you all know the story about Harrison and the search for longitude and the essential requirement to find a solution which would allow people at sea to know where they were and therefore save lives and all that. It was really important to find a solution, so this was an essential thing. Today, watchmaking has been completely freed from any essential requirement. It's entirely superfluous, yet it keeps going, and lots of people are interested, and you're all here, and we're all talking about watchmaking and blah, 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 you know. It's bizarre, isn't it? So what's it, you know, the fact that this technical requirement has been eliminated is cool, because in my opinion then, watchmaking has no reason to exist except for love and beauty. The beauty is hidden in all of the detail inside the watch in a subtle, almost imperceptible little beguiling and enthralling 40mm box with all of this magic dust inside, most of which you can't even see. It's brilliant. It's so intriguing. The best and most interesting things are the things which don't reveal themselves completely, which only reveal themselves in a shadow. you can half see it. It intrigues you and it draws you in. I think that's what's so wonderful about watchmaking. So the closer you look, the more you're going to see. But if you don't look closely at all, you see nothing. So I encourage everybody to look really closely at all of the watches that you're interested in and try to spot all those magic details which are lurking in there, just waiting to be discovered. So I think what watchmaking, why it exists, its purpose is it's like a piece of art, really. I think it serves the same function as a fantastic painting or a piece of sculpture or whatever. You know, it enriches the life of the person who gets to share their life with the thing, and it transmits love and passion from the maker to that person who owns it or is the custodian of it for however long, be that a watch, a painting, or whatever. And I think this is the thread which stretches across this room from me, the designer, creator, whatever, to you, the collector, journalist, enthusiast. When you have a watch that I've worked on, designed, it's like you're wearing a piece of my soul on your wrist, because I've put my heart and everything into it. And that's not something I give away readily. This is why I don't wear a watch or even own a watch that I wear on a regular basis, because it's just far too emotional and personal. There's so much agony goes into creating it, but also so much love. And I think love really is the key. That's the underlying thing which drives anybody who's creating stuff to do it. So whenever you look at the watch on your wrist, I beg you, please, don't take it for granted and really think about that. That's it. Thank you for listening. So if anybody has any questions, I mean, I'm all ears. So I think we have these guys who are going to help us. Here we go. Ian.
Thank you very much, Stephen. I suspect you've probably stressed as long over this talk as you have over the watches you do.
Thank you. I don't know I'm not sure if that's a compliment or not, is it?
No, I'd just like to say, I think I've probably seen at least 80 talks over the years at the horology forums, and this is by far the best one I've ever seen.
Oh, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ian. Oh, yeah.
I just want to know what do you do to relax, or do you relax, or is there any semblance of release that you can have from this stress?
Yeah, I've been asked that before. Well, I find drinking's quite good, but no, it's true. I mean, I'm switched. Max and the MBNF people will tell you I'm quite hard to live with. You know, I'm quite neurotic. So it's difficult to switch off. Yeah. That's why when I go on holiday, I try to go on holiday for like a wee bit longer, because it takes me at least a week to sort of switch off and turn all this crap off in my head, you know, and think about other things. I don't know. Cool. Yeah.
I just want to say, I see your twin right here.
Oh, yeah? Cool. Yeah.
Yes.
Sorry, my question was,
Yes, Ian.
when you first go to Max with that rough sketch at the very beginning, you haven't done any of the geometry, you haven't drawn out things in detail. How much thought had you given to the basics of how it would work?
So I would have just literally an idea in the back of my head of course, I've got the concept of what the watch what it's going to do. The main thing would be the functionality. What, in the case of the chronograph, obviously the two chronographs with the switching button, the inverting button. So I had all the ideas of what it would do, and I had a very vague idea of maybe how it might do it. But that was all. I hadn't designed anything. I hadn't done any geometry. So at that point, I couldn't even tell you, is it possible? What we would always do with the projects is we would have like a 3-month probation period. So once I start working on it properly, I would have 3 months to dig in properly and try to answer that question, is it doable or not, on the understanding with MBNF that if I reach the end of that 3 months and I realise that it's not doable, we're mutually happy with that and we walk away. Because at the point of the sketch, I still don't actually know if it's even possible to do in mechanics. So it's just, but I will have a notion in the back of my head, but nothing more.
Thank you for this amazing talk. My question is, when you design a new movement or mechanism, how do you consider fatigue stress? I mean, for the components.
Well, I'm trained as a watchmaker. And I say a watchmaker, I mean a watchmaker at the bench. My background is actually all the workshop and the machines and the bench and the tools and all that sort of stuff. That's the world I come from. So, and I worked a great deal in sort of restoration all through my the earlier part of my career, So I would say that I've got a really good insight into what works and what doesn't work. The bit about actually being a watch designer, if you do that in Switzerland, you go to effectively an engineering college for 4 years, and you study what is a sort of subset of engineering, which is like watch engineering, And so those guys are all very clever engineers and stuff. I have never done that. So my work as a watch designer, I'm entirely self-taught in that. So I would say that I look at all the stuff with the eyes of a watchmaker with a lot of experience in terms of what will work and what will not work. Sure, with the CAD software and all that, you can analyze you can use finite element analysis to work out fatigue stress and all that sort of stuff. But more often than not, I will know just by the look of the spring or the component whether it's right or whether it's not right. And to be honest, I've always stuck to that method, and it's never let me down. So it's really I've kind of got a sense of what is going to work and what's not going to work.
Thank you.
Hi, thanks for the amazing talk. I read somewhere that you studied theology at Oxford. Is that true?
Yes.
I was going to ask you how that spills into your watchmaking, but you made it evident by your talk.
I'm still wondering how. Yeah.
No, but you spoke about beauty versus function. You spoke about bringing things to life. You spoke about obsession, about purpose, meaning. I mean, it sounds like you gave a religious speech just now. It was amazing.
Okay, that's very interesting. I've never really looked at it like that. It doesn't. The fact that I did that at university, it's true. That's not really. Of course, it's part of my past and everything. But I'm not a religious person. I'm very interested in all that, but I'm not religious. But it was sort of more of a diversion. It's because where I'm from in Northern Ireland, watchmaking is not a career anybody would ever think of. So I've been passionately interested in all this rubbish since I was like 4 or 5 years old, but I never considered it as a viable career until much later in my life, because nobody does that where I'm from. So I went off and did other things in the meantime, and then finally came back to this because it just wouldn't go away. It kept, as I say, that hand kept reaching out and trying to grab me. But I don't know. I like your question. Truthfully, I don't really know how to answer it, and I hadn't thought about it. Yeah, maybe so. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. That's interesting.
This was absolutely incredible talk, and really right here.
Sorry. Yes, brilliant. Yeah.
Absolutely incredible talk, and
Thank you.
love your inspiration, your obsession. Do you have children?
3.
How do your children feel once you've had that aha moment?
My
how
children.
How do you share that with your children if you do?
The answer's going to disappoint you. I'm really sorry, but my children have no interest in watchmaking whatsoever. They couldn't give a monkeys. And do you know what? I'm delighted about that. My son's really into tennis. I'm not sporty at all. Sometimes people ask, if you want to become a watchmaker, how did you become a watchmaker? How would you start? And it's a question I always hesitate to answer, because if I was to say, watchmaking, it fulfills a requirement and I have to do it, but I don't know I could say that it makes me happy. Therefore, I'm not sure that I would necessarily want my children to do it as well, or to share that. So in a way, I'm almost relieved that they're not interested, because I'm not sure that I would like to see them going down the same precarious path that I find myself so far down now. So of course, I show them the stuff that I've done, and I remember bringing my daughter in to look at, I remember in that prototype of this, I showed you earlier the slides of the prototype, whenever I got that working, I remember bringing my daughter in to look, and she thought it was fantastic, you know, but I mean, it's just the rubbish that I play with in the workshop, you know, nobody's really all that bothered. My wife's very hard to impress, she doesn't want to know, you know, so it's good. I think it's good, it's very grounding, I think it's quite healthy actually, you know. I wouldn't want to be in a watchmaking family. I don't know how the Dufours manage it.
Hello, Aldis. I would like to thank you to be here. Thank you to love our watches. For you, Aldis. And do you know the Black Adam film, movies? This is Aldis. Yes. Thank you to be here on this. I love you.
Okay, oh no, there we go, yeah.
Okay, thank you for your talk again.
Pleasure.
I just wanted to ask, you mentioned you don't wear watches
No.
at all. Have you ever wore this watch, and if so, how did it feel when you wore it?
I've never worn that watch,
Okay.
no. And I remember the day of the launch, I mentioned that thing in Geneva that we did. I was in Geneva and Max was here in Dubai. And when I walked into the room in the old town of Geneva to do that launch, that was the first time, Harris will remember, that was the first time I'd ever been in the room with the watch, because they had the watch there for the launch, all finished and cased. I'd only ever had it in the workshop. The prototype that I showed you, I'd never seen it in the case. I'd never seen it with the finished components and all the colors. And I was so terrified of the thing. Harris showed me, and I couldn't look at it. I just couldn't even look at it. I was so terrified by it. And so we did that thing, but I didn't. He was trying to show me, oh, it looks really nice. You know, you should be proud. And I was like, Harris, please take it away. So no, I've never worn it, and I would hesitate. I was going to say I would hesitate to put it on my wrist. It's like, I don't know what that would feel like. I mean, you see what it represents to me is such a huge symbol of everything I poured into it that it would be like wearing a red hot band. But no, not as yet.
Okay. Hopefully you do one day.
Maybe, let's see.
My brother,
Hey.
Kindred Spirit, what's happening, man? I'm aware of how deeply humble you are, at the same time how brilliant you are. And I understand when you're passionate about a project, you know, the anxiety, sometimes you can be neurotic about the process and not understand exactly what you're doing until it's done. But your contributions in BNF, what you guys have contributed to the world of horology and beyond horology in terms of the interest, in terms of the passion, in terms of creativity, is massive. Does the impact that you have made with your creations ever give you a means of peace at the end of the process?
No. No, I can be really clear about that. No, not at all. I take no. Max gets I think tired with me as well about this, but I don't take any real satisfaction from it. I don't look at it and think I'm all proud and delighted. That's not the feeling at all. It's more of when it's done, it's just more of a feeling of thank God that's off the table.
Yeah.
You know, I don't get a feeling of an achievement at all. I'm so racked with self-doubt all the time that I never see the things that are good about it or that I should be pleased about. I just see the things that have been a problem or the sort of emotional scars that I have as a result of dealing with the problems, you know. So it's true, I need to find a way to be more, to find more love for myself. Maybe that's what I'm struggling with.
If I may, because I understand that, and to a degree I understand that's what drives your brilliance is the constant notion, that consistent push to discover the thing, you know, answer the unasked question.
Yeah.
But allow us in this room today, to at least be a reflection of your brilliance and our gratefulness for what you have contributed. And take it in. Give yourself grace and take it in for a moment to know that you have contributed brilliance to the world beyond horology. I'm talking about passion, art, a love for something you guys have contributed to and created a culture. And please take in this room to know that we all have a great deal of respect and love for what it is that you do, and we are grateful to you for what you do.
That's very kind. Thank you very much. Okay. Brilliant. Thanks, everybody. Cheers.